Yeah. So what would be the greatest way that I could experience this unlimitedness that I pray about every day?
Just enjoy it, my dear friend. You see, you can't put it in a bottle, and you can't give it a name. Ultimately, part of the plan as you grow into greater and greater love is as you are on a quest for love. Suddenly, you become that, and no longer are you seeking it, but you're just the full expression of it.
Welcome to the I Bring Water Show. I am your host, Michael Mason. You are listening to EP8, Grounded Spirituality with Matthew Brownstein. How are you, sir?
Very good, Michael. How are you?
I'm awesome. Thank you. Thank you for being here.
Thanks for having me.
Really appreciate it. So we'll get started. I'm really curious about you, about your path, about your relationship with spirituality, and give the listeners a real opportunity to kind of get a sense for where you're coming from.
Yeah, I love how we're starting from the most important thing, right? Like, forget titles, forget everything, just what's the deepest place we can go? In fact, when we first connected, you had said something like how deep the rabbit hole really goes and how far you've gone in it. And I'm like, good, let's just go there. So for me, the introduction to that began when I was 19 years old. I was lying in bed at night. Nothing out of the ordinary, nothing unusual for the day. I was lying there with my girlfriend at the time, and we had just finished making love, so it was relaxed, but there was nothing unusual. She was rubbing my chest, and all of a sudden, the whole room turned light. It wasn't just pure white, but it was oneness. Everything was made of the same stuff. It was just pure love everywhere. It was bliss. It was peace. It was pure goodness. I use the word God just because it was like, well, whatever God is, this must be that. It was life itself. I knew it couldn't die, and I knew I was part of it. What was so significant, though, as I hear myself telling that story again now, it's like, well, that's just the way it is. And I knew at that moment, that's just the way it is. That's who we are. So I started writing that night. I wrote 20 pages I'd never written before in my life. And then then I go to sleep. The next morning I wake up, the experience is completely gone. I can't say I was depressed, but I was deeply changed. It was disturbing to know everything is made of one conscious love, one energy, one bliss. And I'm not feeling it. I asked everyone I knew. No one had any answer. I was in college at the time, so I changed my major to philosophy. And the philosophers intellectually spoke about God, but they never told you how to experience it directly. I got into religion. They talked a lot about God, but they didn't really teach you how to experience it. But they did introduce me to the different saints and sages who had taken that plunge, who are living in that state. Then I found mysticism, which is really a branch or a way of approaching religion, at least I feel, where the individual longs to know the divine and needs to experience it directly. That's where I found the mystical paths, and like Zen Buddhism, yogic practice, Sufism, Christian mysticism, Kabbalah. I just went deep into everything possible. Within about a year, I started tapping into it again and again regularly. Then out-of-body experiences happened, and all sorts of mystical experiences unfolded, and they've continued to unfold over the years. So the path has really deepened and matured, but those early days absolutely changed the trajectory of my life. In fact, I didn't even have a trajectory until that happened. Once it did, everything made sense. Even if I felt lost, I knew there was a path to tap into that again.
Awesome. So, and that is really interesting. And I could certainly see, a lot of similarities in terms of, how that was just a natural inclination, for me as an individual, always since I was a kid, contemplating the nature of reality, contemplating, why I was what I was. I remember as like a young teen even, or maybe even younger than that, I would always wonder why. I would always wonder why, if I had certain thoughts, and those thoughts brought me a certain level of peace or happiness, whether it's getting a new game or going out and playing or whatever it is. And then the other thoughts, in terms of having to go to school or things that I disliked, they brought me a certain level of resistance or unhappiness. And so I can remember as a kid that I wondered, like, how I could find peace, why was it that the external circumstances of the way I thought were what would be the determining factor for whether I felt good or I didn't feel good. Does that make sense?
Oh, sure. For sure.
Yeah. So for me, that was always like, and then the second thing that I remember that always stuck with me was that I knew that part of who I was because of, my genetics, the parental structure, and my environment, the way that I was raised, and the way that I perceived my reality was based on those factors. But I always knew that there was something deeper, something abiding, that was really the determining factor for who I was and why I thought the way I did. And it wasn't till in my late teens that I realized that it was the soul, and the soul was the primary factor for why we are who we are. And I think it's funny, we talk about this show and the title being Grounded Spirituality, and some of the things that you just shared in your intro, which is about this like intellectual spirituality and coming from a place of living in the world and operating from our mind or from our ego or from our intellect, versus moving into mysticism or a deeper relationship with what it is that we really are, which is God, which is love, which is truth, which is eternal, which is the foundation of what we are as energy, as souls, as human beings, physical vehicles vibrating and creating an opportunity for the soul to utilize as a vehicle to gather experience. And so what I recognized as a young man was that so many people, life, society is operating from this intellectual space, and that I was profoundly curious about the truth about who and what we are. I was curious about why I felt such a profound and unconditional love in the center of my being for all of life. And I knew that this unconditional love was my relationship with God, and was how I knew God directly. And so I knew that the way that society had framed to me what God was, as this kind of externalized being and often judgmental being. And because I knew inherently that my love for all of humanity, for life, was unconditional, and I knew inside of myself, without even putting words to it, that was God, that was the true God, I recognized that so much of the programming that society was operating from was very limited or very distorted. That kind of set me on my own path to moving deeper into my curiosity and my desire to know what it is that I really was, and to have a direct relationship with God as love itself, and to ultimately, put on the mind of Christ, if you will, and become the fullest expression of love as I possibly could.
Mm-hmm.
And absolutely, to bring it full circle, that certainly requires us to go down a rabbit hole that is infinite.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And so yeah, I think it's fitting. I'd like to tap into a topic, because I think this is a real focal point for this show and for our conversation and for the opportunity to share with the listeners. And though, if there was one thing on our pre-call that had the most energy, in terms of our communication, it was this comment you made about, what do we do when we grow up spiritually? And I'd love, what do we do when we grow up spiritually? I'd love to hear your perspective on that.
Yeah, I think what I meant by that, and we talk about mysticism, the idea of the mature mystic. So in my early days, after having tapped in or was invaded by that love, by that presence, I became a devotee of it. I needed to tap into it again and again. And it was bliss. And all I want to do is feel bliss. I just want to feel that love, the communion, the connection, literally rolling on the floor in ecstasy. And then you think, okay, that's spirituality, right? I'm filled with bliss and joy and peace and love. And I'm like feeling like I'm running, but my feet are 2 inches off the ground, like feeling so light and so free. Yet there was always something in the first experience that was inherent in it. It was the desire to want to give that away to others. And no matter how much I would be feeling so good, there was a feeling of, I want to share this. I want to share this. So my experience of truth is in that space of oneness. There's a deeper realization that comes over time. I'm saying you haven't had that deep realization, just others get to the point, right, where they realize, oh, they're suffering. No matter how blissful I am, there's other people who are in pain, animals, beings that are in pain. However, you don't see them as other when you're in oneness consciousness. You see it as your very own self, right? So being in that relationship with God, where it's this communion with love, but then you're aware of all the atrocities in this world. Like you said, there's another message out there, right, which isn't just pure love. And essentially that dialogue, that message, that way of being is filled with suffering, right? However we describe that, we come to, like the Buddha did. He came to the realization of, oh, there's suffering going on. I really resonate with the bodhisattva ideal of Buddhism that essentially says, as long as there's still suffering, I'm not going to be done. I will keep coming back. I'll do whatever it takes until all beings are free of suffering and pain. So to me, who will you be when you grow up spiritually is, what is your mission? What is your purpose? What can you do that no one else can do? Because I believe everyone is unique and valuable and important and has a mission and a purpose. And that purpose, I would have to say, and I think you would agree, is God-given. It's not something we just make up. It's not like you invent what your purpose is. The more clear you get on who you really are, you realize, oh, I'm here to do something really valuable that's going to help to relieve suffering. And if we're not doing that one thing, then essentially it could be said we're on a useless journey. We're doing something that is fun, but essentially we're just wasting time, right? If you're sent somewhere to do one thing, until you do that one thing, your mission just isn't complete. So the words I always love to give in these podcasts, like when they say, what's like the one thing you could say? Stay on the path, find the path and stay on the path, because there is a path. And if you're not on it, you really haven't grown up spiritually.
Thank you. That's very wonderful.
Hmm.
Yeah. And I think there's a lot to be said. And if I could share tools, with the listeners around that, is that, how we have these individual identities and how purposeful our egos are. And this masculine energy, it has a tremendous purpose for our individuality and self-expression in this planet. But as we move deeper into the self, we realize that into this emotional feminine energy, into, what I would say is the Holy Spirit or the Divine Mother, or just this all-abiding frequency of consciousness that is, essentially what has given birth to the universe, so that we could utilize it as a playground for our self-development, if you will. Or so my point is, as we start to tap into those energies of unity, those energies of love, those energies of oneness, which are the ultimate truth of what we are as beings, we begin to recognize that it's not all, rose-colored glasses, and that because we live on a planet with 8 billion or so people that are at so many different stages of personal development, spiritual development, that are probably from so many different realms of consciousness and star systems. And Earth is a tremendous melting pot of consciousness, and so it's a very diverse, dynamic, and from my perspective, a planet that's becoming more and more intense as we are transitioning into what I would say is this new age of Aquarius, or this age of, moving from self-awareness to learning the early lessons of love, and love as understanding, as I would call it. And so as we are helping people come back to themselves in recognition of what, love is, and developing a discerning mind that allows us to begin to cultivate understanding and compassion, which is really the goal. We see that developing a strong sense of individuality is really the base. You can move into this intellectual spirituality and unicorns and meditation, and not to say that all of these things and these expressions aren't great, but that ultimately the work on this planet is about getting in the dirt of life and love. It's about looking at our darkness. It's about looking at the stuff that we've repressed, the hurt, the pain, the fear, the anger, and giving ourselves a format to feel it for ourselves. And so if we want to support the healing and help people process the suffering that is built in through a long history of fear and pain and manipulation and injustice, that is the history of this planet in a lot of ways throughout so many cultures, all over the globe, we have to make a true commitment, I believe, to this like radical self-honesty, this radical self-love, and this ability to truly look at and bring our own stuff to the surface, and process our own sense of suffering, and it's kind of this generic saying, which is, you can't help the world heal, or you can't help another person until you learn to heal yourself or help yourself or empower yourself. And I believe that is truly the starting point for us all on the path. I mean, developing that self and moving from a place of idealism, spiritually speaking, to a practicality of how you can begin to apply those tools that the skills that you develop in relationship with self, so that then as you empower yourself, you heal yourself, you develop your own identity and your own strength of identity, then you have tools to help others do that as well. And then that just becomes this reciprocal effect in terms of how society, how culture, how this planet is transformed from a place of separation, from pain, from fear, and from manipulation, to a place of virtue, of love, of transparency, of teamwork, and a potential for harmony. Not to say that it'll ever be perfect, because we don't want perfection. The dualistic nature has its purpose, but helping people come to recognize that unity is the underlining foundational piece of our existence. I believe that in a lot of ways is the work,
Mm-hmm. I couldn't agree more. I'm totally in line with everything you're saying. The thing I hear out of all that you were saying is the individual sense of self. And in some sense, right, we're strengthening that sense of self that we believe we are. There's a Zen master. He said, I spent the first 20 years of my life building my ego. I spent the next 60 years or 80 years, however long, taking it down. Right. So that in the sense of unity or oneness consciousness, when we get a strong sense of self, right, it's beautiful. And then what happens when that starts to dissolve, right, when we're letting go of the self that we built up, like Jalaluddin Rumi. He said, tear your house down now. Just like, don't wait till after death. Tear that thing down now. So yeah, the one thread I heard through everything you're saying is bringing it back to the self, to look at who do we think we are, right? And like you talked about, like masculine and feminine energy, and maybe the male ego, or whatever, I would just say the ego, doesn't necessarily want to look at the pain and the suffering that's going on in there, right? We have all our defense and coping mechanisms, but when we really, like you and I, have experienced the divine, you can't live without it at some point. And then you have to say, well, what's keeping me from that? And then realize you're keeping you from that, right? It's that individual false sense of self that is the only thing making it seem like oneness isn't the one reality, right? Oneness is oneness. Oneness is always oneness. Why everything else is experiencing that oneness, but why are we, this self-conscious individual, thinking that we're separate from it? It comes down to exactly that, I believe, what you're saying, the individual separate self who feels self-conscious, yet is able to jump into more of a cosmic conscious way of being, to an expanded way of being, if we're only willing to let go of who we think we are. So I love the Zen model of don't know mind, just I don't know. I just don't know. So there's no relying on the intellect because it can't really know. So what do you do when you just keep letting go and letting go? To me, it's just a surrendering and letting reality be what it is. And then realizing, wow, reality is much better than anything I actually ever could have dreamed of had I only been willing to surrender to it and just let it be itself.
Right. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. And it is truly about, learning how to open up this universal heart and seeing that there is an inherent value in all of life. And when we can begin to move beyond our intellectual classifications and value systems and all, like you said, the defense mechanisms and all the different ways that we try to compensate intellectually for our emotional insecurity. I think that's a big part of modern life and for all of us. And certainly developing a strong sense of ego will ultimately lead you to a place of surrendering. You can only develop so much masculine virtue, and you can only operate from an intellectual space so long before it completely dissolves. And when it dissolves, what you're left with is what I would be a realized ego. So if you look at maybe the Trinity, in terms of my experience, I had no idea what the Trinity was before I experienced my, say my cosmic awakening. I had an initial awakening at 18 where the silent observer woke up, the soul woke up, but it wasn't until, 16 years later when I had a complete opening and I became essentially a conduit for the universe that, and where I was in an altered state of consciousness where it took me, half a decade before I even started feeling grounded again. And we're 9 years in. So, but my point is, the Holy Spirit being the Divine Mother, and then so that's the mother, and the father is this actualized ego, and the child is the ego that is unrealized. And so that's kind of how I see it in terms of those who are focused on the ego self, that is the child, and then through the mother we give birth to our larger self, and that is basically the actualized ego. And so my point is, when we're focused on the individual identity, we move through to oneness, and then as we come out, kind of getting back to your point of what do we do when we grow up spiritually, is now you realize that you have an actualized or an always actualizing, ego that is infinitely actualizing, but it is infinite. It is profoundly aware of and connected to that silent observer, like permanently. So you realize that the abiding self is the observer, and the ego is, the ego is an awakened ego, if you will, if that makes sense.
Yeah, it does. There's semantics here, like how you might use the word ego or how you might define Divine Mother and how you equate it with the Holy Spirit. But I'm with you. I can surf with this model with you. So, it's all good. Yeah. So I guess I would ask, is there maybe an inherent question in what we're talking about?
Well, I don't know. And I think I don't think there is a question. I think it's just kind of dialogue, but I'd like to move into, and that is a great transition, to talk a little bit about in terms of what you do for a living, some of your organizations, some of the different things that you offer. We talked a little bit about in past that, kind of getting into personal development, into energy blocks, and some of the techniques, or I think you called them technologies, that we could utilize to help folks who are really interested and really sincere about that path of personal spiritual development. So I'd love to hear a little bit about that. So I think that's a great transition.
Sounds good. Yeah. So we can go real philosophical, but yeah, I like practical too, because grounded spirituality, right? So yeah, my path after philosophy and religion in college led to traditional Chinese medicine, because I learned enough that there were blocks to the awareness of love's presence. I discovered through different teachings that love, that light is everywhere. I had tapped into that. Yet, how could I get others to tap into that? I could do it through meditation and Tai Chi and yoga and devotional chanting, but most people weren't doing these type of things. And I was saying, what kind of profession could I have where I could just clear people's blocks, show them who they truly are, and awaken them to, like you're talking about, like an awakened ego. Your sense of self is aware of who you really are. Like, let me give someone a cosmic experience and heal them in the process. So I'm saying, how can I heal people and enlighten people? It's healing and enlightenment. After 2 different Chinese medical colleges, I realized, for me personally, not to put down Chinese medicine, it wasn't my path. It just wasn't getting to the spirit mind level that I needed to awaken people to who they are. Very few acupuncture sessions I ever experienced were just mind-blowing like that, because mind-blowing. And how do you blow the mind? How do you awaken people to who they really are? Chinese medicine wasn't quite that path for me. Eventually, I found hypnotherapy. And I had a voice, I'm sure you know that voice, you might call it the Holy Spirit, right in my face saying, you are going to be a hypnotherapist. And I said, no, I'm going to be a doctor of Oriental medicine. And the voice said, no, you're going to be a hypnotherapist. And then it doesn't argue with me. So I just dove very deep into the path of hypnotherapy and all the related modalities or mental technologies, to use that term. So eventually, in my own meditations, once I had done, I would say, all of my graduate and postgraduate studies, I was asking Spirit in meditation up in the Colorado mountains, fasting, meditating, praying, like, God, I'm almost 25 years old. What am I going to do with the rest of my life? And Spirit gave to me the word anahat, which is the heart chakra, as you may know. And it was, go found Anahat Meditation Center. And it just started this whole path of helping people to meditate, to learn techniques, to tap into that peace and light and love and joy and wisdom, but also use hypnotherapy to help people to clear their blocks and to awaken to who they are. So that eventually led to, long story short, now that's been like a 30-year journey, to Anahat Education Group. We run the Institute of Interpersonal Hypnotherapy. So we are one of the few state licensed schools offering career diplomas in hypnotherapy. And our specific brand is interpersonal hypnotherapy, because, again, communing with Spirit on this, I was asking, basically, okay, what is hypnotherapy? Is it transpersonal? Is it about bringing people to the divine self? Is it just about ascending and, spiritual awakening? And Spirit said, yes, and it's interpersonal, meaning interpersonal was more sacred than just transpersonal. And to me, transpersonal was like, wow, if we can just awaken people to who they are, yet it involves relationship to do that. It involves networking and community and just the one-on-one connection. And yet the deeper interpersonal is really intrapersonal, where you were talking about, like, kind of inner characters, like the inner child, the inner mother, the inner father. We have all these aspects of self. And hypnotherapy, to me, was a way to integrate all aspects of self back into that sense of oneness. All psychosomatic illness, meaning the mind caused the illness, can be healed through the mind. So the body can be healed through the mind. The emotions, the heart can be healed through this practice. The mind itself can be healed through this practice, and people can be awakened spiritually to this end. What I found is I can offer people legitimate state licensed careers in this profession. And that was like, well, that's it. Like, that's my life calling. So essentially, there's a lot more. My company has grown a lot over the years. Yeah, I've said a lot. So I'll say that's the essence of what I'm all about.
No, that's great. I read about that in your in 2007 that you had founded the Transpersonal Institute. Was that the name of it?
Yeah, when I started it, it was in Gainesville, Florida. It was called the Florida Institute of Hypnotherapy.
Okay.
And then after a few years of running it and really seeing like, who are the students and what's happening, it was just, it was miraculous watching the early days of the school blossom. Eventually, I was sitting in meditation and I asked that question. So what is this work now? I'm like watching all these miracles and careers and people are healing. That is it transpersonal? And Spirit said it's interpersonal. And I'm like, interpersonal hypnotherapy. And then that was the light bulb moment. I wrote the book on it. I bought every domain name on it, and we've been under that brand ever since. So yeah, it started Florida Institute of Hypnotherapy around 2011 or 12. That's when that shift started occurring. And I realized we had to rebrand ourselves, that we were an international movement. My staff now, they're like, Matthew, this is a movement. I'm like, I guess so. I didn't intend for it to be a movement. I would, I'm just along for the ride at this point. I listen to Spirit. Spirit tells me what to do. I just obey. It's really what it comes down to, is just follow that voice. And it seems scary at times. But when I look at where my life is now, there's no doubt that the divine hand is behind everything if we just surrender to it. So yeah, all of this work, all these terms like Anahat Education Group, interpersonal hypnotherapy, they didn't come from my personal self. It was like and so we talk about techniques. I run a website called onlinemonastery.com, where I offer the Anahat teachings or the Anahat meditation system. It's based in sacred geometry. And as we talk about like a cosmic awakening or collective awakening, more and more people are waking up to there's something about these energy grids. There's something about Metatron's cube and the six-pointed star and like, what is the flower of life? And all of that was coming to me in 1996 when I was having these major downloads of a meditation system that helps to align you back into this state. So I would say a core part of my work, aside from the interpersonal hypnotherapy work, is the Anahat meditation system. It's what helps keep me, the statement, and our topic is good, right? Grounded spirituality. Mm-hmm. With the six-pointed star, if you think about, you can be fully ascended, fully connected to Spirit, fully descended, yet with a fully open heart. So fully grounded, fully open to Spirit, with a fully open heart. Because like you, I was a mystic tapping into these really high experiences where I didn't know how to ground that, like, years to try to come back into your body. Mm-hmm. And I was praying, how do you balance being fully grounded? And yet I don't want to cut off the higher mystical experiences. Mm-hmm. So I want to be fully grounded, fully open to Spirit with a fully open heart. And the answer Spirit gave to me for that one was the Anahat meditation system. So I give that away for free. I don't charge for it. It came to me. It was given to me. I didn't invent it. It's not mine. And so I joyfully give it away. Again, it's onlinemonastery.com for any of your listeners who might be looking for techniques or, a path to dive deeper into it. And again, totally free.
That's awesome. Thank you so much. Thank you for sharing that. Now, getting back to kind of where we are at in this kind of movement of, speaking to you following your path and coming to a place where you've learned the importance of self-surrender in your work and allowing you to be kind of a vessel for something more profound to work through you in order to support humanity. I feel like that too has been a big part of my unfolding and continues to become part of my unfolding, which is, for the last 20 years, I remember on my path, on my way to work, crying and communicating to the universe, let me be a vessel for your work, let me be a tool for God's love and however that's gonna, show up. And I think it is really important for folks to recognize that a tremendous part of our spiritual development is about that relationship with the inner self. It is about coming to a greater realization that we can source our lives from an inner sense of reality. In terms of most people are operating from an externalized, cause and effect belief system for how life works. And not to say that that doesn't have an effect on us, but learning how to move inward and to begin sourcing our life through that relationship with something that's deeper inside of us, and being able to surrender and being able to trust that unknown, and being able to allow ourselves to become a vehicle for the highest frequency, the highest love, the highest truth, the highest intention possible. And some of the notes I had for this show were obviously talking about some of the things that that your organization provides in terms of resources for folks, but also in the recognition that we are moving into a new place on this planet, and that there are a lot of people who want to be able to begin incorporating their inner self or their deeper spiritual self into their daily life. And they want to start giving themselves permission to be able to express their whole self. So it doesn't have to be this, you can only be connected to the divine when you go to church, or you can only be connected to the divine when you're in meditation, and or you can only be connected to the divine in this like personal space. But how can we start bringing and giving ourselves permission to bring our whole self into all aspects of our life? And I know that what I could tell from you was that's a tremendous passion in terms of you helping provide spiritually minded people with the resources so that they can start finding ways to, making a living, expressing who they truly are. And for me, part of my path is to help bring spirituality to mass consciousness, is to everyday folks who don't necessarily even wouldn't classify themselves as spiritual or as mystical or any of those things. But I know from my path of, working in a manufacturing facility the last 20 years and being on a path to trying to find a way to express my whole self and not feel shameful for the fact that I am different, or for the fact that I think different, or for the fact that, it's okay for me as a man to be emotional or to be connected or to, whatever the case may be. I just think there are so many programs that we need to begin to work through and deprogram to get ourselves to a space where, we can bring our whole selves to the table of life every single day. You know what I mean? And I know that's probably a pretty loaded kind of frame job, but it's something that I want to communicate with the listeners. And I want to acknowledge you for doing your part in helping folks, find their path to, expressing their whole self in their everyday lives, and helping other people to achieve that as well. So I wanted to acknowledge that and communicate that.
Thank you. I think it's an important, probably the most important message. I hear you saying, help people to be fully themselves. Yet it takes a God-realized mystic to be able to help people to fully be themselves, because you have to know what a full self is. So like in the yogic model, we have the chakra system, and spiritually minded people are usually higher chakra people, right? And then worldly people are lower chakra people. And then only women are heart-centered people. That's silliness, right? You're a 7 chakra being, regardless of your sex or gender or your past or your career, right? So what is the whole of who you are? You are a spiritual, mental, emotional, physical being having a human experience. And I don't know how we can make that more clear, right? It's like you're a spiritual being having a human experience. You have a mind, you have a heart, you have a body, you have the ability to have an extremely affluent, abundant, successful life. So to me, the idea that spirituality and prosperity are two different things has to be integrated out of the duality into a non-dualistic model of what's more abundant than the universe? What's more abundant than God? Why can't we have, first of all of who we are, right? Why can't I be fully myself? without fear, without shame, just like be yourself. So isn't that the ultimate ancient wisdom? They say, be yourself or know yourself. Yet I mentioned in the Zen model, it's have don't know mind. Don't label or define yourself. Don't limit yourself, but keep, like you said, you're searching for truth beyond science, beyond intellect. Like, what is reality? Who am I? And my experience is the answer to that question is glorious. And anybody who knows it must give it away, right? There's no way I could know that we're the very same self and not want to help you because you're me. And not just help you to know yourself as peace, which is, beautiful. Like inner peace is like, what else is there? But there is this whole universe going on. And why not live it and love it fully? So I offer in our school something called the Life Mastery course, which helps people to systematically achieve success in all aspects of their life. So as you were talking, I'm like, oh, Life Mastery course. So it's interpersonal hypnotherapy, onlinemonastery.com, the Anahat teachings, and Life Mastery. Those are like my three main offerings to the world. If you have a career that's spiritually based, where you're making really good money, every other aspect of your life is successful, and you know how to meditate to be perfectly in balance with the divine, like, I don't know what else to give. So I'm just going to give that away. Like, I couldn't find anything better to do with my life than exactly what we're talking about.
Yeah, that's wonderful. Yeah. And I think that is a balance between selflessness and the self, right? And being able to recognize that, we can tap into the higher chakras and the virtues and the ability to assertively communicate ourselves and have boundaries and to be in our universal heart and to, be creative and to be sensual and to be grounded and to, and to tap into the abundance that is available in all aspects of reality, financially, physically, emotionally, spiritually, sexually, and be able to give ourselves permission to bring that whole self to the table of life. And that's absolutely essential. And that is the work. And it is also, for me as an individual, I found that part of being able to get to a point where even the reality that was something that was available to me was, regularly giving myself space to quiet the noise of the world and to, tune in to really begin to listen to what my heart wanted and what my heart needed and how I could love myself enough. And so I think that, I think that's probably the best advice that I have for people is it's a wonderful world. It's a world that has so much entertainment and so much distraction and and everything in between to experience. And we should certainly experience that. But I think it's important that we never forget that the way that we are going to, get to a place where we are living a life that is aligned with who we truly are on the inside and who we came here to become, we're going to have to be able to develop the observer of the self, the self that is at the center of who and what we are. And quieting the noise of the world is what allows us to begin to connect with our purpose, and which is always going to be, it's in relationship with God, but there isn't a separation between God and self at that point. It becomes, it's a knowing that.
Right. Knowing who you truly are in that space is everything. So yeah, I've just found it's about, like you talked about, kind of the outside and the inside and these things that, like, there's this world and we can have fun in it. I'm a Course in Miracles student and teacher, and it's one of the other major things I like to bring to the world to teach that. And the course is largely about, it's largely about a lot of things, but it makes distinctions between the real and the unreal, truth and illusion. Yet it says really what's valuable and what's valueless. And at some point, it's like, wow, been there, done that. Like I've paraglided off this in the Sacred Valley of Peru near Cusco. I've paraglided in Colombia and Costa Rica. I've traveled like to Prague and Vienna. And it's like, all right, I've experienced the whole planet. This is awesome. but right, we know there's so much more. So I think at some point after you've been out there playing with all these different journeys you can have, eventually I think what you're talking about is like the inner journey. That's all right, just stop and be still. So like, there's the meditation cushion, there's a yoga mat, there's like I must spend, it used to be like 12 hours a day in meditation. Now maybe it's 5 or 6, but still hours a day in meditation. So why would somebody who has the means, the ability to travel the world, and you can tell them a paraglider, so I can fly off of mountains, and yet why do I sit on a cushion with my eyes closed by myself in the woods? Like who would do that, unless what's inside is even more valuable than what's outside, right? And that's, I believe, what the true mystic finds is inside. That's where the peace, the light, the love, the joy, the bliss, and like you were talking about, the highest intentions. Just I sit in meditation and I say, what would be better? Okay, I'm feeling bliss. What would be better? All right, more peace. Okay, what would be better? Oneness with God. What would be better? Less personal self. What would be better? So anything I could do externally to try to get those feelings is unnecessary, because those feelings are inside. And I think that's what you were getting at, is like, in conversations with God, the higher God voice says, if you don't go within, you go without. Right. So no matter how much fun we're having out there, if you don't find who you truly are inside of yourself with that open heart, as we're talking about, then the journey's just not done. How could you be self-realized? How could you be self-actualized if you don't even know who you are and know the things that we're talking about? Right. So if anybody's hearing these words and saying like, these two people, these two guys have tapped into unconditional love and light and bliss and peace. Right. Like, well, I want that. Right. So, and of course, in Miracles, the only job of a true teacher is to create motivation. Right. So I just hope this is motivating one person to say, well, I'm going to meditate more. I'm going to find out what they're talking about. There's all that light and love in me. If you're not feeling it, it's worth the price of admission to take the inner journey for sure.
But yeah, I mean, in terms of the tools for people, certainly the two things that I could, share are, as we develop the observer, as we develop more of a sense of presence, those would be looking at our patterns of attachment, our patterns of grasping and our patterns of resistance. Mm-hmm. So when we can begin to look at how we grasp, at things in life, in relationships, our belief systems, and so on and so forth, we can begin to look underneath of those grasping patterns and see what the source of those are. Is it fear? Is it love? Is it a need for security? Is it insecurity? And it allows us to start decoding our own consciousness. And so that grasping in conjunction with the resistance, then we can also look at what we are resisting and why we are resisting and what is unprocessed, when we kind of get back to these whole, how we can go about, releasing some of these energetic blocks and moving deeper into the observer role, or moving deeper into God, love, whatever. It's, if there is resistance, why and what needs to move? How can we begin moving through these blocks? How can we also give ourselves permission for these energy patterns to come to the surface of our consciousness and not judge them? How can we become friends with our fear? How can we learn to love and nurture the self that is insecure, that is afraid, that is grasping for a sense of security? How can we move into a place of loving allowance? So, how can we learn to love ourselves unconditionally and there's this kind of this paradox, if I actually go into this, where sometimes, like, I've made a video where I've talked to people about non-judgment, but the reality is judgment's always going to be a part of life. The difference being, I believe, is when you are less self-aware, the judgment ends up being filtered through your limiting belief systems ultimately, or your unprocessed blocks, fears, judgments, so on and so forth. And so as we move through our blocks, through our fears, through our judgments, and through those patterns, we begin developing spiritual discernment. And so I believe, from my own perspective, that it is okay that we are always going to have an ego, and that we're always going to, sometimes we're going to judge, and we're going to be human, and we're going to get frustrated. It's okay to think that there doesn't need to be this perfected state of being. We're allowed to be both a divine creature who's rooted in oneness, and we're allowed to be an individualized a person who has biases, who has, opinions, because part of those biases, part of those opinions, part of that individuality is how God does its work through the individual. So I think it's important, and when we're talking about grounded spirituality, I want to be able to give the whole model to people. I want people to know that it's okay to tap into that unconditional self-love and that non-judgment, and it's okay to be the individual who has opinions, who has, pain points, who gets frustrated sometimes, who does want to flex their ego or their opinions out in the world, because it's all grace. I believe at the end of the day, when we develop a relationship with grace, we're able to then provide that space for others as well to operate in their own grace, which is an imperfected state. That's the nature, I believe, of the mother, that chaotic, ever evolving growth and death and rebirth. That's all part of the infinite unfolding, like a lotus flower of the soul, right? I mean, it's at least in my perspective. So thank you for triggering that. That's something I really wanted to share in terms of, allowing people a perspective to, again, be moved back, to be your whole self, not to just have to intellectualize or to have this idealistic model for what being spiritual means.
Yeah, I hear you talking in your own unique, wonderful way about a universal path, right? That at some point you realize, I'm in here. I'm conscious. I'm the observer. I'm the knower. I'm the witness, right? We have all these different words for the idea that you're conscious. And then there's this evolution of kind of, like you say, discerning, like I'm the observing consciousness. I'm observing a human. And instead of trying to get rid of the human, destroy the human, change the human, realize it's a human. Okay, so then there's that like higher, lower self dynamic. The lower self of human, body, mind, emotions, judgments, preferences, opinions. Okay, there's a human there, right? And that's not necessarily going to be perfected. Like, let it be what it is. But then where's the perfection? The observer. The consciousness is peace. The consciousness is complete. The consciousness doesn't need to be healed. So that my experience is the more we pull into that, then we start going through those years of out-of-body mystical experiences, because you're becoming more infatuated with your divine self. Right. And yet you keep coming back to, oh, there's still a human here. There's still a human here. And eventually there's an integration. So in Zen, they say, when the ordinary man achieves enlightenment, he becomes a sage. But when the sage attains true understanding, he becomes an ordinary man. Right? Or the idea that, in the beginning, it's like in the beginning, trees are trees and mountains are mountains. But in enlightenment, trees are not trees and mountains are not mountains. But in the deepest realization, trees are trees, mountains are mountains. It's like nothing special. And yet that makes every moment sacred, because now the consciousness that you are is so fully present to here and now. Every moment is mystical experiences, because you are that. Right, you're like, that's it. You said like you are God. Ta Twamasi, they say in Hinduism, thou art that. So yeah, my experience is it comes full circle, and it universally comes full circle. Like no matter what path you walk, you're going to go through those stages of kind of extracting your soul from your humanness, learning who you are in your relationship with your source, and then you'll keep realizing, still here. Like it's still a body. I'm not a body, but I keep coming back to this thing. So let me say, how is it useful? So in A Course in Miracles, the only value for this vehicle is a communication device. For a spirit, it doesn't need anything, right? What do you need? You're whole and complete as who you are as spirit. So why the body? Why the body? To communicate to others who need to hear. Because if it weren't for teachers who are speaking the truths, how would anybody hear it, right? So just the fact that you're saying these things means, and by the way, like as I hear you speak, hear us speak, 20, 30 years ago, this wasn't happening. We didn't have the internet. We didn't have YouTube. These teachings, it took me years and years of study to find these understandings that you and I have just expressed within about an hour. It's just, we have the technologies now, not just the internet, but like the techniques, the tools they're beautiful YouTube recordings, meditations that, I mean, I made some of them I could recommend, that whether they're beautiful or not, that's up to the listener, but I was talking to other people's, but I've made my own recording that guide people into the direct experience of the self. So I like to say our school as a business is like a sales funnel to God, that people don't always realize, oh, I'm just going to learn hypnosis, I'm going to learn meditation, I'm going to learn how to help people to stop smoking or deeper, move through their emotional blocks. But eventually, when students get into our clinical, transpersonal, and interpersonal trainings, they realize, oh, wow, this is a path of self-realization. That's why my team is like, this is a movement, because there's something at the core of what you're saying, what I'm saying, which is universally happening, right? Where people are waking up, and it's happening much faster than it ever has before. Where we're going, I don't know. I just know I have a mission. I believe, like I said, everybody's a mission. If we just do our mission, just like you said, in Sanskrit, it's rag and dvesh, attachment and aversion, or aversion and attachment. But basically, while we're still doing all that stuff, we're so busy. When we surrender and let go, we realize, okay, yes, I'm a spiritual being. Yes, I'm here with a mission. Yes, they're suffering. Okay, I will be of service. It's like when all the fluff goes away, yeah, the individual self is still there, but it becomes like the great Saint Ramakrishna. He said, yes, you're going to have ego, but you should keep the ego of the child, or the ego of the lover, or the ego of the servant. Right? It's like being like a child of God, keep that ego. Or I'll be a lover. Okay, keep that ego. Or I'll be a servant to all of humanity. I like the line, the Sufis call it a friend to the heart of the human race. And I feel like that's what it means to grow up spiritually. It's when you, in the deep mystical paths, you become a secret friend with God, but eventually you're a friend to the heart of the human race, because you realize the oneness and there's nothing left to do in that space of compassion, but just to be of service. So I appreciate you getting the word out there.
No, it's wonderful. I thank you. I think that's certainly a great closing to this program, and I think it is true. I think that the heart of humanity is found in our relationship with compassion, and our ability to move into that space of love, really love for self. And then that love for self, it just magnifies in the ways that we interact with everyone around us as a result of that relationship with who we are on the inside. And yeah, thank you for being on this program today. And I'll make sure we put in all of the links to all of the resources for all the things that you're doing in the show notes. And again, it was really, really nice to meet you, Matthew, and I look forward to talking to you again.
Yeah, you too, Michael. Thank you for the discussion. It was great.
Awesome. Well, until next time, everybody, stay thirsty for life. I love you.